you. And nobody cares what you think, say or do. Just open your eyes to the pain that another is going through. Just take them by the hand until their light shines anew. It's like a star, you too are a light. You may be small, but you know that it's alright. 'Cause even when you're not feeling all that bright, you can still guide a weary traveler through the night. There will be times when you lose your way, and you'll feel like you're going it alone. Just give another the gift of a better day, and you surely will have one of your own. There will be times when you lose your way, and you'll feel like you're going it alone. Just give another the gift of a better day, and you surely will have one of your own. Everybody says we're only reaping what we sow. The day is coming when we have to pay everything we owe. So why not sow a little bit of love and let it grow? You'll touch another heart in a beautiful way you'll never know. 'Cause like a star, you too are a light.
You are that.
You may be small, but you know that it's alright.
It's alright.
'Cause even when you're not feeling all that bright, you can still guide a weary traveler through the night. You can still guide a weary traveler through the night. You can still guide a weary traveler through the night.
I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom, and my soul is at peace in God.
I just continue in this state of openness. I relax and I let go. The mind is a strange thing sometimes. What we think is real, what looks like a giant to us, can simply be a perception. The first place I deal with this giant is within my own being. I don't struggle to change appearances or facts. But to simply let go. To know the truth. That I am in God. And God is in me. I continue to relax. I move deeper into the peace of God. For a few moments of quiet, I let myself be immersed fully in this peace. begin now to come from this time of quiet. My mind is open and receptive. To a broader field of reality. Thank you, God. Amen. So today we're going to look at two gates. It's a familiar verse from Jesus, which I'll get into in a moment, but I would like to talk a little bit about the difference in religion and spirituality. And if you look this up, just Google religion and spirituality, you'll get a definition, which I'm going to kind of incorporate in the talk. But it's so common that you can Google it these days, the idea that people are making a distinction between formal religion and their own spiritual path. And I totally get this. I totally understand this. I went from a religion that is a recognized formal religion. It's got a lot of people involved in it, the Baptist Church, to something that is basically a minority, a very, on the larger scale, unity is not even mentioned. When you look up religion, and all of the world's religions were not even listed there. I think at one time we were, but it's different now. But to me, that is, I used to think that was a bad thing, that we were part of a minority, but I don't think it's such a bad thing now, and I think by the time I'm done here today, you'll know why I think that. Excuse me. No, I don't have the virus. Enter by the narrow gate. This is a statement from Jesus and the basis of what I want to talk about. And it's interesting because if I was another minister, I would be talking about this in a very different way than I'm going to be talking about it today. So enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. And just as some commentary here, today we're witnessing a move away from organized religion toward a more personal quest for spiritual enlightenment. It's common to hear people say that religion in general no longer appeals to them, as they've grown weary of being told what they're supposed to think. And I didn't really know I've heard things about that people are fleeing organized religion, but I just did a search on that yesterday, and that's a pretty interesting thing to look up. And a lot of the polls that they've done confirm that, and millennials in particular are not interested in organized religion. So that's the upcoming generation, and we'll see what happens over the next 25, 50 years or so to the whole thing. And it doesn't mean that it's dying necessarily. It just means that the numbers are going down. People are looking in different directions for their spiritual support. And I think a lot of the younger people don't even consider a need for spiritual support. I think it's science so dominates our thinking, our culture, that people are turning away more and more from religion and just looking at science as the salvation. And, that's where all the religion didn't create devices, and what would we do without our devices? So we have put science on a pedestal, and I think the time will come when that will change. And it wouldn't take a whole lot to upset that, to mess up our whole online thing. There are several natural forces that could interrupt, all of that in just a very short period of time.
And that's, maybe sometime we'll need that to happen just so we'll start living again. Just like, what did we do before we worried about not having toilet paper? That was like, nobody ever thought of that, something like that. But here it hit us, and people started getting a little more real, as a result of realizing how much we take for granted. But so religion is out there, and it's very prominent in a lot of ways, but people are saying, well, maybe there's another way. Maybe I don't have to go down that path. Maybe this whole spiritual thing, because many people's exposure to religion is based on literal interpretations of the Bible, of aspects of the Bible. And so science basically has proven that the earth is not flat, as the ancient Hebrew believed it was. And there are a lot of people still today, or some people I should say, that believe that they're called the flat earthers. They believe the earth is still flat. We can actually see photographs of the earth, and it's kind of hard to understand how someone could go along with that. But I don't care if they do, it's okay. It doesn't matter how flat your earth is. If you want to live on a flat earth, that's your prerogative. But what people are sometimes rejecting as God and religion is just the one they were given, the idea they were given. And I've said before that if I had not been introduced to the type of thinking that is in unity, I would probably have set religion totally aside. I would no longer attend the Baptist church. I know that. But if I thought, that's what God is, that's what spirituality is, it's confined to that religion, then maybe I would declare myself an atheist. But I'm far from that. I totally believe in God, and but in a very different way than I used to, in a very different way than was presented. So instead of throw out religion, there are a lot of people that are looking at what is the spiritual alternative? What is a different way to go? Is there a different way to go? And there's a ton of spiritual literature out there. There's lots of groups, lots of book study groups, a lot of people that aren't taking the traditional religious view, and that can enhance your spiritual development, just like going to a church. But so that kind of thinking is, I would be on the front line of that, in the sense of, let's ask some questions. I no longer take the Bible literally because I've studied it for 40 years, and I've been exposed to some phenomenal religious scholars that through my unity training, and they were not unity people. They were brought in usually from St. Paul's School of Theology. They're called critical scholars, and it's a scholar that looks at the Bible, any aspect of the Bible, and says, how did this come about? The traditional belief I had is God pretty much dictated what a writer was to write down, how they were to say it and so on, and that the Bible represents the Word of God, that is direct communication. But the question then becomes, why are there so many contradictions? Why are there two flood stories? Why are there two creation stories that are in different sequences? Why? And the two flood stories are actually combined. There's 2 of every kind of animal. There's 7 of every kind of animal. And the way the critical scholar explains this is these were 2 different traditions that were later combined into one story. And to make matters even more complicated, that story is almost identical to a Babylonian myth that was discovered on clay tablets that far predate the Old Testament. And the hero was not Noah, it was a fellow by the name of Utnapishtim or something like that. I just call him Ut. But he built this ark. This flood was coming. He built this ark, brought on animals of all kinds and stuff. This is an ancient story. And we know that Israel, or the Hebrews, were in Babylonian captivity for about 400 years. So why wouldn't they adopt some of their stories? But in fact, every culture has a flood story. Everybody has a flood story. It's one of the most common ancient catastrophes that, in terms of mythological stories, that there is. And it's so the critical scholar would say, well, maybe this biblical flood story crept in, or was brought in some way from this sequence, from the Babylonian captivity and all that. That does not make it invalid in terms of what it has to teach us. This whole idea of destruction and starting all over. It's a thing that happens all the time. It's happening right now. We're going through a major change right now. We're having a major flood at this very moment in our culture. And when the water settles, when things settle down, it'll be different. And it won't necessarily be worse. It'll probably be a lot better. But we don't know what that's going to be, and you don't have to know. Just stay in the ark for a while. So that's the if I had not been exposed to that side of Bible scholarship, and they don't have all the answers either. I want to be clear about that. Science does not have all the answers, and critical scholarship does not have all the answers, because they tend to miss the mystical side of the teaching just by looking at trying to sort out the historical facts. And when you get into spiritual teachings, it's not about historical facts. It's about tapping into an unseen dimension that in which we live and move and have our being right now. So this week I was reading a blog written by a Catholic Monsignor who, using the same passage I'm using today, explained why the road to hell, which he says is the wide gate, or the wide road, is taken by so many. And he lists about 7 or 8 items, and among those items that he lists were that the average human is difficult to save. So what he's saying is hell is a reality, because what is salvation all about? It's about keeping you out of hell. And this Monsignor was very clear about this, that most people are going to go to hell. But the way he was saying it is, you're not in the Catholic Church, so you've got a problem. If you don't buy into what I'm saying to you, that you're difficult to save. So that's the message. So humans are difficult to save, he says. We don't like to be told what to do. Well, what he's saying is, you don't want to hear the Catholic message, or you don't want to hear the religious message. It could be Protestant, it could be any religious message. They're saying, you don't want to hear that, so you're going to hell. Is that really how it works? I said that if I were to name the gospel of Jesus, I would use the prodigal son. The prodigal son committed every sin in the book, and Jesus made it that way. This is a story he made up. And he presented, this kid takes his inheritance, commits every sin on the planet, and ends up just totally almost self-destroying, self-destructing. Decides to come home, and what happens? Does the father say, now look, you've really caused some problems here, and you're a pretty bad person, so I don't think I'm going to let you in. I don't think I'm going to let you in. So how does that set with the message we're getting, like from this Monsignor? You're difficult to save. You're not listening to me. You're not listening to the church. The church has been established for 2,000 years plus, and you're not listening to it. So that makes you difficult to save. So if that was my only exposure to religion, I'd say, well, make mine vanilla, because I don't want that one. And that's what I said, because that's the religion I grew up in also. If you're not a Christian, you won't be saved. Saved from the fires of hell. And you don't see anything like that. You don't see a hint of that in the prodigal son. There's no condemnation, absolutely none, in that story. But in the church there is, and in the writers, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there is condemnation. And I think that's where part of this statement comes from. So if being told what to do, what we must do, comes from an edict issued by either the Catholic or Protestant Church authorities, then I would agree with the Monsignor. I do not trust the integrity of my spiritual quest to either source. And I'm assuming that you more or less have taken that same attitude by stepping out of whatever your past experience was and going in another direction. There are people that think unity is leading people to hell. And it's like when I discovered it, it made the most sense of any spiritual presentation I've ever encountered. I don't agree with a lot of what the contemporary unity teaches, but I know what I was taught. I know what I picked up in it, and that's what I have retained. That God is changeless. God is centered in every single person. And you can't stray so far into the far country, and you can't sin so bad that you're going to change that relationship. You can't do it. It's impossible. No matter how far out you go. And see, that's the difference in following a religious path, because almost every single one will tell you that if you go out too far, you won't come back. You won't be allowed to come back. And so much of religion is based on a misunderstanding of the nature of omnipresence. You can't leave the presence of God. If God is everywhere present, you simply cannot step out of the presence of God. And no human being is so powerful that they can change the behavior of God. The prodigal son did not change the behavior of his father. He actually brought something out in the father that we wouldn't expect. That is absolute, unconditional love. But religion will say love is conditional. God's love is conditional. Now I sent my son, I have done all this stuff to give you the opportunity to get back in. But if you don't take that, if you pick some other religion, if you become a Buddhist, you're not welcome. I think if the prodigal son had gone out and converted to Buddhism, the father would have accepted him just the same. I don't think it would have mattered. That's a teaching of the church that it matters, not the teaching of Jesus. And that's what I want to focus on through this whole thing. So the notion of the wide gate leading to destruction is probably a warning, not from Jesus, but from Matthew, that there are consequences to falling away from the doctrine that Matthew was advancing. And I've been pointing out the difference between the gospel of Jesus and the gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They represent the early doctrine of the church. That's the narrative that they're promoting. And so they will take a statement of Jesus, and they'll, this idea of the wide gate, that if you enter by the wide gate, like so many people do, you'll be destroyed. There's destruction. I think that's Matthew saying that. If you don't stay with us, this group, that at that time they were called the followers of the way, and they were the followers of the teachings of Jesus, or the followers of Jesus. And that began to develop into Christianity. But they formed conditional love. It's based on conditions, that you stay with us or you're entering by the wide gate, which is destructive. So I don't think Jesus taught that. He sure didn't teach it in the parable of the prodigal son. And that's how I think of the gospel of Jesus. When you consider the emphasis that mainstream Christianity has placed on sin and the possibility of hell, you see that fear has always been used as a motivator. And that's one thing that Unity has never done that I have noticed anyway. Maybe they've started doing it now, but I don't think so. Is if you don't do this, if you don't come to church, if you don't read the Bible, if you don't do the things that we authorities tell you, then there's a possibility of going to hell. And in one sense, the prodigal son had a brother, an older brother, that stayed home, followed all the rules, and did all the stuff, and he wanted his younger brother to be punished. He represents more the traditional view of the church, the traditional view of religion, is there are consequences if you do something, if you get out of sorts, if you get out of line. But I would say again, if you stood in this building and cursed the sun and just said every bad thing you could think of toward the sun, I don't know who would do that, but if you did, you could still step outside and enjoy the sun. It would not say, a few minutes ago you were kind of bad-mouthing me, so I think I'm going to keep my light from you, and I'm going to do it for eternity. We can't even imagine that, something like that. So where does that come from? It's not a natural thing. And the closer you get to God in your own personal experience, the more you realize God is absolute love, unchanging, unconditional. And all of us have strayed out into a far country of some kind, if nothing else, just in our crazy thinking. If you've ever been terrified of something, if you've ever been angry at something, if you've ever been just upset over something somebody said, you're out in the far country. But you can come back. You come back home. Doesn't matter how far out you go, because we live and move and have our being in God. And Jesus talked about the sun shines on the just and the unjust, the rain falls on everybody. You don't earn it. It just does it because that's what it does. Meister Eckhart, I don't thank God for loving me because he can't help himself. It's a changeless reality. We're the one that strays away. We're the prodigal that goes out and suffers. But we can return home any time, and that's what religion fails to say. Now they'll say that you can return home, but they will mean often, come to our house, come join us, and profess this, profess that, and walk the straight and narrow. Can't do it on your own. But to me, the narrow gate is doing it on your own. If you do it on your own, if you have your own first-hand experience with God, that will solve 99% of your spiritual problems in terms of understanding what you're dealing with. And you may stay in a very traditional church. One of my favorite authors, Evelyn Underhill, she loved the Catholic Church. But her book it's called Mysticism, and she wrote all about all of these mystics throughout the ages and what the process of spiritual awakening, what's involved in that. It's a classic book, and she was recognized by the Catholic Church, in fact, for that work. But she loved the trappings of the church. And there are a lot of people that do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not advocating you've got to get out of that. But if that's all you have, if you're in this organization because you think, I'm saved, I'm part of the group that's in, and you don't really give much thought about the spiritual path beyond that, then you're in the wide gate. A person who is spiritually asleep can be very religious, but they're not awake. And that's what we want. The narrow gate is a person who is awake spiritually, who understands their connection with the infinite. And that is, people might get into unity because we don't put a lot of emphasis on giving money all the time. Or we don't put a lot of emphasis on, I can't think of the name, when people knock on doors and evangelism and all that kind of thing. And I respect people that do that. we get visitors from Jehovah's Witnesses once in a while. I know they can't read, so I forgive them because I have a sign on my door that says no solicitors. They don't consider that a solicitation, I guess, but it's okay. But I admire people that have that kind of drive, I guess, belief in their religion. It's okay. I wouldn't ever try to talk anyone from what they think is true and what they feel is true, or say in any way that what I think is true is superior to what you think. So I want the right to be me, to follow my path, to enter what I think is the narrow gate. That is, shut everything out, go off by yourself, sit in your quiet moments and open yourself to that inner presence. The world is not doing that. That's the narrow gate. And when you pray to God who's in secret, pray to the Father who's in secret, as Jesus says, the Father will reward you openly. That means your life begins to express on earth as it is in heaven. But it's an inner connection. It's a connecting to that living water that wells up into eternal life, as he said. It's an inner thing. And it's you can find it in religion, but you don't need religion to find it. And that's an important thing to understand. And what I have a feeling, most people that are attracted to a way of life like this have developed their own religion. And a lot of people will think that's crazy, but I don't. As I've said before, if you take the books that you've highlighted, the inspirational lines, you could put all those together and say, it's somebody else's writing, but it's the gospel according to you. You highlight something because you know at some level that it's true. It's meaningful. How do you know that? How do we know that? Something in us says that's true. When I first read Emily Cady's book, something in me jumped. I knew it was true. And I figured, erroneously, I was wrong twice yesterday about two things, and today many years ago I was wrong about something else, so that's three, I guess. But I erroneously thought, this makes so much sense, everybody will love it. And so I loaned the book to several people, and they thought it was horrible. Thought it was the work of the devil. So that's religious training. It's my mind was open enough, I guess, to look for something else, because where I was didn't seem that satisfying. But for some people it is. And those who are devoted to that way of life, where religion is a Sunday thing and, the rest of the week is just, the Sunday thing is just something you kind of do, it's okay. But I have run into many people like that through the years that hit brick walls in their life, and they don't know what to do beyond that because they don't have any sense of a larger context which the spiritual life should give us. So it's everybody's own choice. So I would argue exactly the opposite from the Monsignor. He says the wide gate's the one that's not in the church and all that. That the narrow gate is the one that leads to the experience of true spiritual enlightenment. Abandoning organized religion is not a prerequisite to a spiritual awakening. As I said, you stay in it if you want. That's fine. But learning to go alone, think alone, and seek light alone, as Emily Cady advised, is the path to a first-hand experience with God. The most profound experiences I've had spiritually have been when I was by myself, alone, and I was consciously seeking that inner experience. And there are many times I've sat quietly with no experience at all. It just seems like nothing's going on, nothing's happening. Then I'd get up and go about my day and suddenly be filled with some inspiration, some joy, without knowing why. And what we're doing is we're opening a floodgate every time you sit down to be still. That's faith. That's the opening of the faith faculty to that inner presence. And you open it up and maybe a little bit trickles in and you don't see it, you don't feel it at that moment, but later on it wells up. And you feel a sense of joy or appreciation, just gratitude. And you're thinking, why do I feel so grateful? But that's the living water. That's that inspiration that wells up within us. So every time you sit down to be still, as hard as it is sometimes, know that something's happening. Know that you're opening that valve just a little more. And the time comes when you know that, and many of you do. Some of the most enlightened Christian teachers in history have been condemned and branded as heretics by Catholic and Protestant authorities alike. Their crime is they didn't like being told what to do. They're hard to save. Though every religion makes God the centerpiece, God is not found in any of them. Does that sound horrible? God is not found in religion. God is experienced at the center of one's being, usually in quiet solitude. And I say usually because it's not always. Remember Paul on the road to Damascus? He wasn't meditating. But somebody some scholars suggested that he was following the followers of Jesus and he was condemning them, persecuting them. And so he probably heard a lot of stories along that path. He probably was hearing things. And he probably was questioning. He was a Pharisee himself. And he probably was questioning. He was dyed in the wool. He was a religious person. So much so that he was making people that didn't think like him miserable. So one day he has this illumination. His mind is opened. He's not in stillness. He's probably on a horse, riding this road, or maybe he's walking, I don't know. But he has an illumination that changes his entire life, that makes him one of the most powerful Christian icons that we have today. And that's quite a force. It would take quite an awakening for something like that to happen. But he didn't get it in church. It was a direct experience. And I'm not saying that all of us will have one of these. But that's where we make contact with God, is within ourselves. And it's a powerful, life-changing thing. It's why I'm standing here today. If in your quest for understanding you find religious trappings helpful and comforting, keep them. But know the narrow gate to enlightenment is one that usually draws the smallest crowd. And we can prove this. Just drive around town and look at the biggest churches. And again, I'm not going to condemn any of them. I have nothing bad to say about any of them. But I have watched several on YouTube that have been broadcasting, during this pandemic. And I'm glad we're here. I'm just so glad that we're here, even if we're a few. It just, I just couldn't do that. I would not be able to do that. So, the difference between religion and spirituality, we all know what religion is, but let's not confuse those two things, religion and spirituality. Your spirituality is yours. You develop a religion around that, and you're doing good, and you've entered by the narrow gate. Okay?
The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we live.
You've been watching a talk presented by Reverend Doug Bottorff at Independent Unity here in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. We would like to thank everyone who joined us here today, as well as those of you who joined us online. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel, and be sure to share it with those you think who might benefit from this message. If this brought value to your life, please consider donating to us on PayPal. Thanks again for watching.